Hello, friends. Welcome to the Alabama Liberal Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about the encroaching idiocracy, idiot nerds, dead elephants, and the return of the know-nothings. I promised 2 September episodes of the podcast, but the very first episode I did in September was like a few days before the debate, and people really wanted to hear about the debate and what I thought about that, even though now it's been weeks, so you probably don't want to hear about it. And I'm doing the same thing for the VP debate. This is going to come out kind of right before the VP debate, which I don't think will be as big of a deal necessarily. It normally isn't. Normally people don't say, well, I was going to vote for this one ticket, but the VP debate really changed my mind about that. It may influence a couple people, like in 2008 when Joe Biden mopped the floor with Sarah Palin. It may have influenced people because McCain was pretty old. They thought this guy could easily die in office, and then Sarah Palin takes over. Obviously, the same thing is true for Trump. He's very old. He's obese. He's losing his mind. He's one cheeseburger away from possibly dying. And then J.D. Vance, a guy with a year and a half's experience in the Senate, could take over the presidency. And this is the main theme of this episode. We're hearing people say, well, Kamala Harris, I don't know if she's got the experience. I don't know what her positions are. I just need to know more about her, blah, blah, blah. All that bullshit that I think we're all kind of tired of hearing. They heard too much about Hillary. They're like, well, Hillary, we've heard too much about her. There's too much information. You know, she was demonized for 30 years. Kamala, Republicans haven't had a chance to do that. But of course, she's got the experience. The district attorney for San Francisco, the 6th biggest city in America. Then the attorney general for California, the biggest state in America, the most populated state. Then a senator for California. Then vice president for 4 years. If you combine her government experience, she's got more than Trump and Vance put together. But people are still saying, well, we need more about her. All that would mean is that Republicans would have a longer timeline to demonize her and scare you to death about her. And so I don't really think you need to know more than you've already learned about her. She has been the vice president for 4 years. She is ready to do the job from day one. And if you listen to Republicans, they say things that are paradoxical. On the one hand, Joe Biden is brain dead and out to lunch, and he basically doesn't know where he's at half the time, and he's Reagan talking to plants in his last 2 years, which would imply to me that Kamala has already sort of been doing more than the typical vice president would do. And then in the next breath, she's radical, she's socialist, she's way different than Biden, she's going to take everything and just ruin it all. This is very typical in Trump world. It's just say whatever you can, throw shit at the wall, doesn't matter, make up whatever you can. And I don't want to spend a ton of time on that debate, although I think it was unanimous that she won that debate. People say, well, it's subjective. Well, it's not that subjective. I think it's unanimous that she won that debate because you've heard Trumpers make up every possible excuse for why he lost the debate. Kamala's earrings had radio transmitters in them. The debate moderators gave her the questions ahead of time. I want to take that one apart because that one is the stupidest, that she had the questions ahead of time. The debate questions are about the same in every single fucking debate. They ask roughly the same topics. They go to general topics. You know they're going to mention immigration. You know they're going to mention abortion, guns, Afghanistan, Ukraine, the economy. You'd have to be in a coma to not know what the questions for the debate are going to be ahead of time. They were asking the same questions to Trump when he was debating Hillary, and then against Biden and now against Kamala. He really should have known what the questions were going to be ahead of time, considering he's been there. As people pointed out, he's had way more presidential debates than she has. He had 2 against Biden, plus a town hall that wasn't really a debate, but he had 2 against Biden in 2020, 3 against Hillary in 2016. He had 1 against Biden in the summer. He really should have had the experience. He just sucked. He just blew it. And saying, well, the black woman moderator, she went to the same sorority as Kamala. They're sorority sisters, and that just shows you that there was no way Trump could have won. They're 15 years apart. They went to different colleges in different generations. People say sorority sisters like they were literally bunking together, like they were college roommates. You have a candidate that sucks, and you can go around and make up all the excuses for him you want. This is the main theme. What are people voting for? Why are they so stubborn with Trump? Does it really speak to the fact that a lot of Americans are stupid? That there's a lot more dumbasses in the country than we ever imagined that there could be or would be. And you see people on the conservative social media platforms, which I now consider Twitter to be that. More of a conservative platform than a liberal one, even though for years it was the liberal platform. them. It was the place you could go and talk about the colonial history of ketchup or some shit. Ketchup is racist, and then you'd have 100 people willing to argue with you about it. I now look at Twitter and think, God, what a bunch of frauds. What a bunch of absolute phonies and frauds. I can't believe I ever cared what these people thought about me. Where I used to have debates with people on Twitter, I'd post something, oh no, I hope the really wokesters and the far left, I hope they don't tear this apart. I can't believe I ever gave a shit. Because now you look at it and the same damn people, they act like they're willing to sign up with Hamas, they're so far to the left. They're posting to Twitter every 5 fucking minutes. They have not changed their tweeting habits at all. Your content on Twitter is being monetized for a guy that hates you. You are funding him. You're helping Elon Musk donate millions of dollars to Trump's super PAC. There's other platforms you could go to where the people running them don't actively hate your fucking guts. And I don't know how much more clear to make that. But these liberals that built up a following and they get a bunch of likes on their tweets, they're still tweeting as though they're doing anything. You're not helping. You're doing nothing. You're taking content for them to sell ads on for people that hate you and are going to fund things you don't want done. If every fucking liberal on Twitter left, all of the media people and the politicians and the people trying to reach a broad audience would say, well, we shouldn't be here either. This is just the Trump people, and why should we give a fuck about this? And then Elon would either be forced to sell it, or it would just become Truth Social. It would just become another joke or a dead end. And by the way, I know people are going to look at me saying that about Twitter and say, well, you're still on Twitter. I'm going to keep advertising Alabama liberal stuff exclusively. I get on there about once every couple of weeks. I don't even know if it's once a month, some months. I really don't like being on there, frankly, because I'm bombarded with tweets from Marjorie Taylor Greene and Kevin McCarthy and Ron DeSantis every time I check my timeline out, and people saying crazy crap that they make it sound like they're good points. They're not good points. So I'm advertising on there. I don't think it does any good. I don't know if I get 10 people, but to be on there once every 2 weeks and to be on there every 10 fucking minutes screaming about Elon Musk is a racist oligarch that must be stopped. You won't even get off Twitter. How the fuck you gonna stop him when you won't even stop making content for him to sell ads on? The majority of intelligent people out there in the country, they know Kamala Harris must become president. They know that it's Trump and Harris is way better. I'm an indecisive guy sometimes. If it's two good choices, sometimes I don't know what to do. I'm like, oh, should we have sushi or pizza? Well, they both sound good. What pizza toppings should we get? Oh man, that could be a challenging one. Pizza toppings could struggle with that because I like a variety of toppings. Two good options are tough to choose from. Trump and Kamala are not two good options. One is a strawberry milkshake and the other is a bleach cocktail. And there's undecided voters and a huge swath of the country apparently can't tell the difference. They look at that and think, should I have a dog shit hoagie or should I have a ham sandwich? A ham sandwich, I really prefer turkey sandwich, so I'm going to have to really think about this. And I have no respect for these people. I'm tired of them. I almost dislike them more than I dislike Trumpers. Trumpers have the opposite problem. They made a choice 9 years ago and they won't waver from it at all. The second he rolled down that golden escalator and told them immigrants were responsible for the bulk of their problems, and that's what they wanted to hear. He's lying to them the way the Know Nothing Party lied to people back in the 1850s. Is how long this shit has been going on. Longer than that, really. But this is how recurring this fantasy that immigrants are responsible for most of your problems. American politics has been going on forever. And the second he told them what they wanted to hear, they gobbled it up and they hadn't questioned it in the 9 years since. Oh, his charity disbanded for fraud? No big deal. His university? Well, that's probably a witch hunt. He slept with a porn star and falsified records to do that? Oh, whatever. 34 convictions? That's all political. The documents case where you can literally hear a recording of him saying, look at all these documents laying around. It's quite incredible. Most of this stuff is highly classified, I wish I could declassify it, but I'm not the president anymore. An audio recording of him saying that shit. Like, oh, that's just the FBI. You know how they are. That's the deep state. Overturning the election results, staging a coup. The Democrats, they support Black Lives Matter and they once ransacked them all, so it's all the same thing. They made a decision and they won't break from it. This is classic sunk cost fallacy. I mentioned this years ago in a podcast episode that explained them perfectly, where because of that 2016 victory, in quote marks, that Pyrrhic victory that is actually destroying the Republican Party and conservatism in general, dead elephants that we're going to get to, they're living in that mindset that this is what they must stick with. We made an investment and it worked, So they think, so they got to stick with this guy forever. If he loses to Kamala, there'll be people saying Trump 2028. These people are just dead. They're ideologically dead. They're chained to a con man, a grifter, a sociopath who really isn't anything like a traditional conservative. And let's talk about some of these endorsements. I know people look at Oprah Winfrey and Taylor Swift and Martha Stewart as left-leaning. They're really not. Taylor Swift may be the most liberal, but she doesn't endorse candidates every single cycle. She really doesn't. She's actually only endorsed about a handful of political candidates, some Tennessee Senate candidates, and Joe Biden. Not every single cycle does she get involved. So she endorsed Kamala in a pretty epic and major way, calling herself a childless cat lady. A lot of single young women, this is aimed squarely at her biggest fan group and following. And there are millions of them. And I'm not saying she'll change a lot of minds, but if a million or so women vote that may not have otherwise voted, they said voter registrations were up after Taylor Swift's announcement. So if a lot of Gen Z women, if they were perhaps not going to vote or something, and this was that little tap that knocked them off the fence, that's terrific. But then you have Oprah Winfrey. She doesn't endorse every single cycle. She's a registered independent. You have Martha Stewart, who's only ever endorsed Hillary. She endorsed Hillary in 2016, and that's it. So now she's endorsed Kamala. But then you have other people that are perhaps even more surprising. Tim McGraw came out. I don't think it was necessarily endorsement of Kamala so much as being pro-choice, just women's rights in general. People interpreted it as pro-Kamala, which is quite interesting. Now you can just say, well, a woman has the right to choose. Oh, here comes a liberal. Here comes some crazy socialist. Tim McGraw said no different than what Richard Nixon or Gerald Ford would have said 50 years ago. A woman's right to choose wasn't always controversial, and there were a lot of Republicans who used to support that. They've been gradually weeded out of the party. Trump used to support it until he needed to become neo-fascist. Mark Cuban, he's not really a liberal at all, but he's gone big against Trump and for Kamala, and I'm really glad that he's done that. You know, he's making a lot of powerful enemies right now. Elon Musk is an extremely powerful enemy. Pharmacy benefit managers that control prescription drugs. He's got cost plus drugs, which is making a lot of enemies in the healthcare field. Billionaire Trump backers like Timothy Mellon and Bill Ackman and guys like that may not look at Cuban as favorably. Kevin O'Leary, his Shark Tank co-host, probably has argued politics with Cubans. So there's a lot of billionaire idiots that he's going to make enemies out of, and I applaud him for doing that. The business community support for Trump is penny wise and pound foolish, and I just can't believe that they're even stupid enough to do that. When you look at other countries that have a fascist dictatorship, they may think, oh, he'll be Mussolini and this will be good for us and they'll get rid of all the regulations and we'll get all the tax cuts. But when you really give that much power to the government and a dictator, it's only a matter of time before they start getting jealous of the billionaires, the real billionaires that run the damn government. They get tired of taking orders after a while. And we see this with Xi Jinping, where the billionaires in China, Jack Ma thought he was too big for his britches. And now look what happened to Jack Ma. Look at the oligarchs in Russia. About half the oligarchs have died in the last couple of years. This one drowned. This one fell out a window. This one mysteriously poisoned himself. This one committed suicide. Nobody is above Putin in Putin's Russia. No businessman who thinks, well, I've made $2 billion in the stock market and therefore no, you're dead. You're gone. Old terms like communist and fascist, they're a little bit misleading, where you're just talking about a dictatorship where there is nobody above them on the pyramid. And I am really surprised that more business people, they think they want this. Half the regulations and laws that are set up in this country are to protect the really rich people. I can't right now just show up with me and a couple cousins and a couple of AK-47s to a mansion in Santa Monica and say, oh, you thought this was your house? This is my house now. I live here now. You don't live here now. In a fascist dictatorship without the rule of law, I might could. If a civil war breaks out in this country, I definitely could. You think of it as disruption, it's destruction. We're going to get rid of the federal government by appointing incompetent nincompoops and people that actively want to get rid of the federal government. Trump will appoint somebody horrible for the environment to the EPA, somebody who actively wants to get rid of the EPA to the EPA, Betsy DeVos to the Secretary of Education, things like that. They're just trying to destroy these departments. You think dismantling the federal government protects you? It doesn't. But in their minds, they're just so worried about the FTC D.C. blocking a mega merger or possibly suing them for something. They can't think 5 steps in front of. If this actually does become Putin's Russia, I could go out a fucking window. His son-in-law decides they'd rather live in my house than have me in it. He promised my mansion to a militia leader, and they live there now. People think that's farce. Look at Project 2025 and see a country where he can do whatever the hell he wants to do and how crazy he actually is. I think they underestimate, well, he's saying crazy stuff to get elected. I don't think they actually know how crazy he truly is, or maybe they're actively blocking it out. But I applaud Cuban for being one of the business people standing up. And then the biggest of all, Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney. The Cheneys are Republican legacy families. For them to not just do the George W. Bush and Mitt Romney bullshit of being like, we don't endorse Trump and we don't like Trump. Well, will you endorse Kamala? Well, we're just going to write in our wife's name. I think the Cheneys, being the pragmatic people, really the true brains behind the Bush White House that they always were, are like, our choices are binary. To say you don't want Trump to be president is to endorse Kamala. Let's just do it. Let's just go out there and say she believes in the rule of law and she's not going to destroy our country and things will at least be fair. If you break the law, then you may go to a trial, but you're going to have a fair trial. It's not going to be a Trump-appointed judge that is going to put you in jail because you tweeted something he didn't like a year ago. Dick Cheney, Mark Cuban, Tim McGraw, Martha Stewart, Oprah Winfrey, every ex-president or Democratic nominee, all have endorsed Kamala. George W. Bush, Mitt Romney, Mike Pence, Paul Ryan have not endorsed Trump. Specifically make it sound like they do not want him to be elected, even if they won't go as far as endorsing Kamala. Mitch McConnell could not speak at the Republican National Convention without getting booed. Everybody who knows what the fuck they're talking about in politics does not want this guy to come back. What does that tell his fans? Why does a truck driver think they know the real Trump better than half of his cabinet, the people who were in charge of the military, anybody who's ever worked for him, ex-friends like Scaramucci, his niece? You could just go on and think, you don't know this guy. Even J.D. Vance has old quotes where he called Trump the American Hitler. I mean, he couldn't even find a running mate that had universally supported him. This should really fucking tell you something. And it should speak really loudly than anything he could ever say or lie about. Are we in an encroaching idiocracy? Where in the polls right now, Kamala has a nationwide lead. She's got like a 3 to 5 point lead. She's usually within the margin of error, but I do think it's very likely she's going to win the popular vote. So people listening to this, they ask me a lot. They say, are you scared Trump's going to steal the race? I've heard that question quite often. Like, are you scared about a civil war if Trump loses? I'm not scared about a civil war if he loses. I'm scared about a civil war if he wins. There's a reason China and Russia have wanted this asshole to be president for as long as they have. They know that they could never, ever beat America in a straight-up military fight. In a straight-up military fight, the United States could wipe the floor with China. I know that's bold. People say, like, that's crazy that you think that. Look at how much damage Israel by itself has done to Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran, just by itself. Look at how much damage Ukraine has done to Russia, the supposedly second best military on earth, just by itself. China doesn't have the second best military on earth. Russia did, supposedly. China's military has not been in a war in 50 years. They're not tested, they're not experienced, they wouldn't know what they're doing, and they could never get here. The American Air Force and Navy would never allow them to even make landfall. The American Marines and Army would never allow them to make landfall, and even if they somehow managed it, there's the U.S. National Guard, there's sizable law enforcement agencies that have military-grade equipment like the DEA, the FBI, the ATF, the U.S. Marshals. There are multiple militia groups that are fantasizing about a Red Dawn type scenario where they're like, all right, this is what we've been waiting for, guys. You got more guns in this country, 1-to-1 guns-people ratio. They're not taking the United States. Ever. I don't even think they could take Hawaii sitting out there in the middle of the Pacific Ocean all by itself. They can't do it. But what they could do is create a civil war within the United States to weaken it so severely that then they could win a war with America. And that's the only way that America is not going to be dominant for the next 50 years. The United States is going to be dominant the next 50 years if you do not re-elect Donald Trump. There's nobody else who really can compete with us. Russia's falling apart. China's economy is stagnant. Everybody bitching about Biden's inflation. Look at China's economy. It sucks. There are no natural competitors to American supremacy for the next half century if you do not reelect Donald fucking Trump. It's that simple. The encroaching idiocracy are people that don't know that and that can't tell the difference. And the idiot nerds, there's a lot of people that we think of as very intelligent that are not intelligent at all. And we see these people talk out their ass all the time. Nate Silver is somebody that we put a ton of respect behind. I think that his name carries a lot of weight. He's sort of thought of as the pollster. He has made increasingly stupid comments that make me think we really shouldn't be listening to this guy. For example, when Kamala took over from Biden, he said, well, ABC, because ABC bought 538, his polling website, and he said, well, ABC appears to be not running new polls in order to help Kamala because there's a polling disadvantage for Kamala and they're going to wait till the polls get better for her to run polls. You could go to the fucking 538 website the day he said that and there were new polls. There were polls for Biden, there were polls for Kamala. They were in transition of nominees where it was Trump versus Biden and then Trump versus Kamala, and then eventually taking RFK out of it because it was Kamala versus Trump with third-party candidates, Kamala versus Trump without them, then taking RFK out as a factor. They were running those polls every single day he was saying that. He was just feeding into that Trump conspiracy. The media and the polls, they are in league with Kamala, the people that run these organizations, the elitists. When I say things like every knowledgeable person is backing Kamala, Trump voters hear that and say, yes, the deep state. There's a lot of multi-billionaires. The really, really rich people have given Trump a ton of money. If the really rich people had not given Trump any money this cycle, Kamala would be killing him in donations. She's had way more small donations, campaign donations. I've given money to Biden and now Kamala. I encourage you to do the same thing, even $5. There's multiple Senate races you should contribute to as well. Take $20, do $5 to John Tester, maybe $10 to John Tester. He really needs it. $10 to Colin Allred, maybe $5 to Sherrod Brown. Let's do the Senate races real quick. Okay. The Senate races, Democrats are in a bad position. They have to defend a lot of tough seats. I think that they are going to defend it well in the Midwestern Three, which Bob Casey, Alyssa Slotnick, and Tammy Baldwin, they all deserve your votes. If you know anybody who lives in those states, please call them and reach out and make the case for those senators. Alyssa Slotnick's a great congresswoman. She's running for the first time. Tammy Baldwin and Bob Casey, they've been good senators before now. Ruben Gallego in Arizona, he's running. You know anybody in Arizona, please reach out to him. Jackie Rosen in Nevada, she's been senator before. She's running for re-election. These are 5 swing states that Kamala, it'd be nice if she won all 5 of those states. But even if she doesn't win all 5 of them, she can still be president. But all those Senate seats need to go to the people I just mentioned. The Democrats have to hold all those because once you get past them, then you've got 2 much tougher re-election races for them. Sherrod Brown in Ohio and the toughest of all, John Tester in Montana. 3 horrible Republicans that wouldn't be reelected. Rick Scott in Florida, Josh Hawley in Missouri, and Ted Cruz in Texas. None of them would be reelected if people weren't half brain dead. But then you have Colin Allred and Ted Cruz. They're very close in polls. Now, I'm loath to give Texas any credit because they've let us down before. Beto O'Rourke versus Ted Cruz in 2018, that looked like it could go the right way. Texas has not had a statewide Democrat win in eons. 3 races that will really determine control of the Senate are Sherrod Brown in Ohio, John Tester in Montana, and Ted Cruz in Texas. It would be amazing if Colin Allred could beat Ted Cruz because then John Tester could lose in Montana and we still have the Senate. But even if everything goes correctly for Tammy Baldwin, Bob Casey, Alyssa Slotnick, Jackie Rosen, and Ruben Gallego, as it stands now, Sherrod Brown and John Tester both have to be reelected. I think Sherrod's odds are a little bit better. I definitely think they're better. I'm not going to say he'll be reelected, but for him, it's a coin toss. For John Tester, it's a little bit worse than that. It would almost be surprising if he were reelected, but he should be, and I don't want you to think that he can't be. If you know anybody who lives in Montana, please reach out to them, call them, make the case for John Tester, and at a minimum, send him even $5. In a state like Montana, it's sparsely populated. There's not a lot of people. The media markets are relatively cheap. $5 could absolutely help him put a commercial on at the exact right time, and 10 people might see it or whatever. You really don't know how much something small might influence people. And of course, Colin Allred in Texas. If you know anybody in Texas, many of you do, I know a few people, call them. reach out to them. Don't just do a Facebook post that they may not see. Talk to them nicely. Be very sweet. Don't share with them the Alabama Liberal podcast where I'm talking about idiot nerds and the encroaching idiocracy. Don't share with them that. That's just for us. So a lot of times, if you call people stupid for not voting for people, they'll really dig in, and it'll just be like, no, I'm right and you're wrong. No, I'm not going to listen to that. They do that quite often, and there'll be some that they just re-elect over and over. This person is borderline corrupt. I mean, they don't seem like they're in it for the people. They just want whatever side deals they can make. People just dig in. They're thinking, oh, no, the person's for me, and they just won't hear anything else. But this podcast is not for the independents and the moderates and the swing voters. This is for us. This is for the people that know how dangerous Trump fucking is. And I'll go back to the question that I mentioned it earlier, but I didn't fully go into it. People ask, are you scared about a civil war breaking out? Are you scared about his people doing violence? Are you scared about what Trump will do if he loses? No, I'm not. I'm not even scared about him rigging it, because right now I'm hearing a lot of people putting it out there that even if Trump loses, he's still going to be reelected because of the false electors, and he's going to pull all these shenanigans. He's going to do everything he can to get back into office because he's a desperate man, and he knows if he's not reelected, he's going to spend the rest of his life in prison. You can see why he lied about cut glass hitting his ear. That was a bullet and everything. He's some He-Man. You can see why he's lying constantly. You can see why he had flop sweat all over him at the debate. He's a desperate man. He will do anything to tar Kamala Harris and just the most idiotic bullshit you've ever heard. He'll make J.D. Vance say the same thing. He dies in prison if he loses this race. Imagine how desperate he was not to lose in 2020. First president in American history to attempt a coup to stay into office. That's pretty fucking desperate. Even in the Civil War times, they're like, hey, Lincoln, here's the keys to the White House. Enjoy it. Nobody's ever been that desperate to stay in office as he was in 2020. And that was before 90 indictments and 34 convictions. Imagine how desperate he is right now. He's a scrambling sociopathic animal. That's why he cannot be reelected. So I know that if he loses, he's going to try everything. But it didn't work in 2020. He couldn't get anything to go his way. He couldn't get the Georgia Secretary of State to find him the 11,000 votes he needed. He couldn't get the recounts to magically produce a bundle of votes that weren't there. He couldn't get the Arizona Republican Party to rig it in his favor. His own cybersecurity czar, Chris Krebs, a Republican, he couldn't get him to lie and say there had been malfeasance. He couldn't get any judges to side with him. He couldn't get his own Attorney General, Bill Barr, who he had picked to put in that job, to say crazy stuff that the election had been rigged. He couldn't get Mike Pence, his loyal lapdog of a vice president, the guy he has march in and out of ball games and go down to the North and South Korean border and squint really hard at North Korea as though Kim Jong-un will say, the jig is up. Take my nuclear weapons. I quit. I surrender. Mike Pence, you bad man. Just stop staring at me. I just shit my pants. Please, and just crawl across the border and beg his forgiveness. The guy he had trotted out constantly as his abuse dummy for COVID. COVID, we're going to put Mike Pence in charge of that. Is he doing a bad job? Okay, Mike, you got to do better. That guy, his stooge, he couldn't get him to throw the Constitution in the trash and not certify a vote that was legitimate. If he wasn't able to do that when he was president, now that he's 4 years older, crazier, less popular, more unhinged, and has less juice, I don't think it's going to be more successful for him this time, guys. I really don't. And I don't want people to hear, well, he's going to rig it, and then Democrats get discouraged, and then they don't show up to vote. That's what I'm really worried about. The scenario I'm most worried about, it's not him losing outright and then trying to rig it and being unable to, and then violence and all that shit. The scenario I'm most worried about is that Kamala wins the popular vote. She wins it by a Hillary margin of 3 million votes or a Biden margin of 7 million votes, but Trump wins the Electoral College. That's what I'm the most worried about. I think she's going to win the popular vote. I would actually put money on it that she'll win the popular vote. But the EC is a coin toss. It's going to be so close. It may come down to North Carolina, Georgia, and Arizona vote Trump. The Midwestern three of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin vote Kamala, and then Nevada. And they have a Republican governor, and they took a very long time to declare Biden the winner in 2020. They took a long time. And there could be weeks of bullshit and jockeying. And then somehow he wins Nevada by like 5,000 votes or less. It's very, very close. But then that becomes the nightmare for me. If I'm Kamala Harris, if I win, maybe I win by an Obama-sized margin. Maybe it's 2008 and I win by 10 million votes. But he wins by 4,000 votes in Nevada. At that point, I then asked the Electoral College to seat me anyway, that this is not what the founders intended. The entire point of the Electoral College is to keep a man like that out of office, and it cannot be the sole reason that he is allowed to become president again. A guy who wins a squeaker in the EC but lost in a blowout in the popular vote cannot be president for another 4 years and transform it into a fascist dictatorship. And that's what I really don't want to happen, is to put her in that position. Hillary didn't do it in 2016, but she lost by 3 states. I don't think Kamala's going to lose by 3 states. I think it's going to maybe come down to 1 state. I don't think it's fair for a squeaker in the Electoral College to cancel out a blowout in the popular vote. It's not fair. And I don't think that's what they intended. And that's what I really don't want to happen, because if it's me, I ask them to seat me anyway. And I say it's not fair to the people who voted to allow this man to take office again. And maybe I plunge the country into a constitutional crisis. I don't know, but I think it's that important to prevent him from becoming president again. So that's why it's important to donate, contribute, raise money. And the idiot nerds, Nate Silver, Elon Musk says crazy shit all the time. He's turned Twitter into his own personal frat house. There was a time when he first took over Twitter and he was posting things that weren't getting that many likes, and other people's were getting more likes than him, and he then tweaked the algorithm to favor him. And you think, the world's richest man. He's not just the world's richest man. He has a lot of power in various industries, but he's got the largest private satellite network in the world, Starlink. He's got the biggest private space company on Earth, SpaceX. NASA has farmed out crucial things to SpaceX that they can no longer do. I don't know why NASA didn't just say, we'll put a man on the moon, instead of trying to contract SpaceX to do that. Because once SpaceX has the capability to actually put men on the moon, women in Mars, they can then sell that to whatever country is willing to pay them. If China says, I'll give you $100 billion to put the first Chinese guy on the moon, of course he'll take that money. He can become the world's first trillionaire very easily if he can then contract out. NASA right now are the only organization that have ever put people on the moon, and they did it 50 years ago. They did it before the internet was created, before smartphones were even a thing. But if Musk is able to copy everything that they've ever been able to do, he can then, Russia wants to colonize space. They want to put a space base on the moon and then say the whole planet's theirs. Well, I can help them do that for only a mere $300 billion. That's not a lot of money for a government, but it's a huge amount of money for him to then become the first trillionaire. He buys more lobbying power. Congress becomes completely sycophantic to him. It's a dangerous cycle to let a guy like him have the largest private space network of satellites, Starlink, the largest private space company, SpaceX. The majority of electric vehicle chargers in the United States are Tesla chargers. That's crucial and critical infrastructure. It would be like if one oil person controlled 80% of the gas stations in America. You can imagine how that might be a problem. In fact, it was a problem. Rockefeller owned Standard Oil and the majority of oil in the country. He had an oil monopoly, and the government had to come in and break it up. Probably should be happening with Musk in the EV charging stations right now, because that's crucial infrastructure for the future of the country. And to have all these things and more, and including the, at one time, second biggest social media platform in America, Twitter, all under one guy who is so petty and small and megalomaniacal that he can tweak the algorithms to favor his tweets over anybody else's. Hey, Bill Gates farted today. And then he's tweaked the algorithms where everybody can see it. Somebody with that level of pettiness and maturity, yeah, I'm a little concerned that they've got that much power. And then other idiot nerds are like the New York Times reporter, Brett Stevens. And I'm so sick of him and people just like him, and he's not the only one, but he's a very noticeable one. The Hamlet Act. Oh, to vote for Kamala or not to vote for Kamala. He did the same shit for Joe Biden. He did the same shit for Hillary Clinton. He does it every cycle. He does it like Trump, but he's been a conservative and a Republican. One of those old school martini glass cocktail party, like, well, the liberal college elite, they're not going to like this bon mot that I'm going to give you. You know, one of those kind of fussy dudes like the Buckley conservatives that have pretty much died out like a long time ago, like the asteroid hit the party and there's been nothing but dead elephants pretty much since Reagan. I mean, they definitely don't really exist anymore, but those sort of from yesteryear 60s Republicans, the faux intellectual Republicans, he can't can't come out and ever say, I'm for Trump. If he comes out and says, I'm for Trump, or I support Trump, or Trump's just as good an option as Kamala, nobody's ever going to listen to him ever again. There's a wide range of never Trump Republicans. You've got people like Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney and Rick Wilson who have really thrown in with the Democrats and like, we want our party back. We want there to be two parties in America. There should be two parties in America. Right now, there's not. The Democrats are my only choice. I'm a lifelong Democrat, Bill Clinton and onwards, but I still think there should be an alternative that people could choose if they wanted to. John McCain versus Barack Obama, that's a choice. Mitt Romney versus Barack Obama, that's a choice as well. Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris, that ain't a choice. And it wasn't a choice between him and Joe Biden, and it wasn't a choice between him and Hillary. To have someone like Brett Stevens and the constant hand-wringing and Hamlet-ish to be or not to be and all that, shut the fuck up. Nobody cares what you think. We're so tired of listening to this. The Democrats, when Trump started running, he ran against Obama, then Hillary, then Joe Biden, now Kamala. If you can't find somebody in those four distinctive candidates that you could support, they're all worthy of support. They're all competent, passionate, capable leaders. And if you can't get behind them, that says more about you than it does where the Democrats are at. That you're not looking for a reason to back the Democratic Party. You get to the American Idiocracy, the great movie Idiocracy, and the movie itself is actually only so-so, but the beginning of the movie where they show how the world got so stupid, I think that's one of the best beginnings for a comedy I've ever seen. If you can watch the opening scene of Idiocracy where they show stupid people are just having more kids and really smart people, they're talking themselves out of kids. There's no natural predators anymore. There's no saber-toothed tiger or anything like that stalking humanity around. We've taken ourselves out of the food chain, so there's nothing that dangerous to stop stupid people before they can have 12 kids, whereas really smart people are like, well, it's not the right time, and maybe in a couple of years after we get back from our Italy trip, and then they just sort of die out. You can sort of see that at the political level. The liberal coalition, it's like they're talking themselves out of voting for Kamala. I see this about Israel and Palestine, and I don't want to get into that because people are so emotional about it that it's almost impossible to have a convo. There's room for a good debate and a good conversation. I'm kind of one of those people who's like, Netanyahu is a horrible leader. I wish he'd never been reelected. That makes me really not want Trump to be reelected. It's a lot of times when a dictator comes back or a demagogue comes back, they leave and then they come back. And that's when they're really bad. Putin did that. There was 4 years Dmitry Medvedev was the president while Putin was term limited out. Then he came back and got rid of the term limits. And we see what Putin's doing. Trump is the same thing. You don't want a guy like that to come back. That's when they're even worse. The liberal people who were like, I'm not voting for Kamala because of Palestine. You're idiots that you staying home and not voting, that's going to help Palestinian people at all, or voting for Jill Stein, which I've heard that a lot. On social media, a woman who's a Jamaican immigrant, she's here on a visa status, like a work visa. I don't know, she works at a college or something like that. She mentioned being an education adjacent job, admin or something. I'm sure there's college kids barking about Palestine in her ear all the time. But she's like, well, I vote for Jill Stein because it's the only conscientious thing to do for Palestine. To prioritize Palestine, a country you've never been to, where you really, frankly, don't know that much about, which a lot of the people that are so for them, they don't really know that a free Palestine under Hamas is not free. It will be another theocratic government where women can't do anything. And they are not really acknowledging that. But to prioritize that over what's best for Jamaica, the country you're from, where Kamala's dad is literally Jamaican. You'll be the first president ever that had a Jamaican parent. You think that might be kind of exciting for you? And then also Jamaica could get swallowed up into the ocean because of climate change, which Trump doesn't want to do anything about. And then to prioritize that over what's best for America, that's myopic. To prioritize a country that you don't know much about. It's in the news a lot. And I think that's where I get really frustrated with a lot of the people like beating their chest over Palestine. I'm like, you didn't do that when it was millions of Uyghurs that disappeared in China, the Chinese Muslims that disappeared. You didn't do that for the Muslims in Myanmar during that Facebook genocide thing. You didn't really say that much about Syria when they were killing their own people. You certainly didn't support the Iranian women when they were protesting their government. There's a lot of stuff happening in the world that you didn't really get that involved with. And it was other Muslim groups. But because Palestine and Israel are in the news a lot, because they're covered quite frequently, that's important to you. because you see it on the news. So I question how deep that activism really is. The BBC mentions Palestine and Israel every 15 minutes if you watch them. CNN and the New York Times cover it quite a bit. So I wonder if it's that it's popular and there's a way for that, and these other places in Africa and Asia, they're kind of like not talking about them. So, well, who gives a shit if the Taliban's terrorizing women again? Israel, Palestine, that's in the news. That activism's not that deep. The liberals who were talking themselves out of voting for Kamala for whatever reasons they can find and come up with, it's very disappointing to see people doing this. And it does make me think that the idiocracy is closer than we possibly could imagine it to be, to look at Trump and Kamala and not be able to see a very distinctive and clear advantage of one of these people over the other. I mean, I almost can't believe I'm having to even talk about this. In 2016, first podcast season, Michael and I were flummoxed as to how people could not see the difference between Hillary and Trump. But at that time, people didn't know Trump as well. And people can see what he did his first term. And they had this interview with Gen Z men. Some of them were like, Trump's years were awful, and they were. But some of them were like, everything was so stable. I miss the stability. There's too much chaos in the world right now. If you were a teenager at that time, your prom, you didn't have a prom. You didn't have a graduation. You couldn't do anything. Your senior year, if you graduated high school in the 2020 COVID year, your senior year sucked. And so to talk about he'll bring the stability back and get rid of the chaos and the world will be more stable, I don't know what the hell they're talking about. And when I say dead elephants, I think he just shows that the Republican Party of yesteryear is gone. All the values that they ever had are dead. But he's pulling elements from way a long time ago, like this thing about tariffs, where he mentions tariffs all the time. That's now the new solution to everything. It's now tax cuts and tariffs. They used to just have tax cuts for all the trickle-down Republicans. Now it's tariffs too. I don't see how they could possibly like that. That's Hoover. Hoover had the Smoot-Hawley tariff, and they think that single-handedly contributed to the Great Depression. Income inequality and economic conservatism of Coolidge and Hoover, and doing absolutely nothing for poor people and letting income inequality get out of control, and then having tariffs led to the Great Depression. And that's why no president since Hoover has been stupid enough to do the type of tariffs that Trump is talking about. And Trump's out there, I love tariffs. Tariffs are going to solve everything. Really proud of his ignorance and showcasing that. I think that that's scary, that the Republican Party as we knew it traditionally, which would have really been dead against tariffs and were total free traders, that's now dead. The dead elephants. To have like strong, we're against dictatorships, we're for freedom in the world, like that type of Reagan Cold War conservatism, to have that be dead, because that's represented by a lot of the Cheney and Romney people that don't like Trump at all. Kind of competent, sort of knew what they were doing, Colin Powell type people, John McCain type people, they're dead or not for Trump. And so that's dead elephants, that he's remaking the party in his own image. The false gods thing, you'd think these evangelicals that love Trump so much, they'd be wary of false gods, but he is making the party into his own golden calf. Pull things from disparate time periods. I mentioned before, Make America Great Again, that's an old Reagan slogan. The America First, that was a Charles Lindbergh and the Nazi sympathizers back in the 30s. That was something they used. America First, don't get involved in World War II. Tariffs that Hoover would have been for once upon a time. What else has he pulled from more than anything is the Know Nothing Party. If you're a historical fan, you remember the Know Nothing Party as a nativist party back in the 1850s. It was a party that existed almost exclusively as a reaction to immigration. Nationwide against immigration, that was their big thing, but then they would target specific regions of the country with different messages. So in the South, they would talk about temperance, wanting prohibition and things like that. They were very against alcohol, but they knew the South was more religious and that would be better for them. They didn't emphasize being anti-slavery, whereas in the North, they would have taken a more anti-slavery position. And in the North, they took a very much anti-Catholic position. They were terrified of Catholics. And yet, in the South, where there weren't that many Catholics, they didn't really emphasize that. Nationwide, anti-immigrant, just like what Trump's doing right now, but then micro-targeting specific regions. When it comes to the Midwest, that Midwestern three he's trying to get, he's all about NAFTA and free trade. They suck. Tariffs are going to save your jobs. If they try to move a plant from Pennsylvania to Mexico, I'm going to slap a 400% tariff on them. Things that are specifically scaring Mark Cuban and Liz Cheney. Liz Cheney, I thought her endorsement would come mostly because of January 6th, but she actually specifically mentioned tariffs and how much the president, they can do that. But if he does that, it could absolutely destroy the American economy. Cuban has pointed out some similar things about that. He could kill companies like John Deere, is what Mark Cuban, who knows at least as much about the economy as Trump does, more about the economy. It's fun to think about, what if Trump Trump Enterprises went before the Shark Tank. Could you imagine Trump walking into the Shark Tank with Trump Enterprises and Cuban asking him a question? He's like, our numbers are the best numbers you've ever seen. Our numbers are the best. What's your customer acquisition cost? It is the best you've ever seen. What is it? It's the best you've ever seen. These numbers are so, like, no, I'm sorry. This guy's a con man. I'm not making a deal with him. How many times have you bankrupted? I've bankrupted multiple casinos. No. He could never get past the Shark Tank. You look at how he's micro-targeting certain regions, just like the Know Nothing Party did. The jobs that have left the Rust Belt and the Midwest, he's really emphasizing that. But for the Sun Belt, like Georgia and then Arizona over there in the Southwest, their economies are doing much better. So for them, he's going to emphasize more, they're taking your religion. They know Georgia's very religious. A lot of voters there are more religious than the bulk of the country. So he knows that whole Southern vote, which he's hoping to get for North Carolina, Georgia, and if he can break away Virginia, he's going to focus very heavily on Christian nationalism and how he's embraced that aspect of it. But meanwhile, further north, up there in that Midwestern 3 he's trying to peel off, he doesn't want to go anti-Catholic because there's a lot of Catholics up there. So he's not going to talk about anything that would be perceived as too evangelical and too Christian nationalist, because that could scare some of the Catholic voters that might otherwise vote for him. But the one thing all of his voters have in common across the country is anti-immigrant bullshit. Now, just to mention one thing about the debate between him and Kamala, because this is important. He mentioned about Haitian immigrants eating the pets, and people were laughing their ass off and like, this guy is so ridiculous. But the problem is, a lot of his voters are dumb enough to believe that shit. They believe everything that falls out of his mouth. And that's the scary thing. In the part of Alabama I'm from, I mentioned Marshall County, Alabama. I did episodes years ago called A Tale of Two Counties, Marshall County, Alabama, and Orange County, California. I talked about how Marshall County used to be Democratic, now it's full blood red Republican. But Orange County, California was a power center for the Republicans. They could fundraise a lot there. Nixon and Reagan and all them, they could count on that being a reliably Republican county that they could raise funds. And now it's not really going that way for Trump because that's how scary and divisive he is. He's realigning some of this stuff. But the opposite happened in Marshall County, Alabama. Now, Lieutenant Governor of Alabama, Will Ainsworth, he's from Marshall County. He's a very Trumpy Republican. And so is Steve Marshall, the Attorney General for Alabama, that literally went to Trump's trial to show support for a guy on a criminal trial. Now, how often does an Attorney General ever do that? But he's also from Marshall County. So now it's become a Republican hub and power center for the state. And the problem that I've heard from way back was immigration. People were always complaining about that because Marshall County has 6 chicken plants, or they were at that time. I'm not sure about right now, but there's Purdue and Goldkist and Tyson. They've all got chicken plants. People further out into the rural areas like 5 Points, they raise chickens and have chicken houses. In the closer to town like Albertville, people will work in chicken plants sometimes. They're terrible jobs. Most people don't want to do them. Albertville went from like 2% Hispanic around the time I was born to about 30% Hispanic over the course of a few decades. So they were talking a lot about immigration, and a lot of the people there didn't like it. And you'd always hear the same things. Mexican people, because they didn't really say like Latinos, and it's mostly Mexican, Guatemalan, and people from Honduras and El Salvador, mostly. So Mexican and then Central American people, more than like the Caribbean or South America. There may be a few, but not that many. And they would always just say Mexicans. They'd say, well, Mexicans, they're taking over and they're doing this and that, and the kids are in school and they can't speak English and they're taking all the jobs. Nobody wanted to debone chickens at Tyson Chicken Plant. Like if your American dream is gutting chickens at Tyson Chicken Plant, I'm pretty sure you can do that. There were realistically some problems with having this massive influx of people. Were not legal. You didn't know who they were, didn't have paperwork. For one very extreme example is one of them killed somebody. There was a man and an illegal Mexican in a parking lot who got into it, and the guy killed somebody, and then he just ran off back to Mexico. Like there's no record of him. He's not legally here. So it made it difficult. And there were small instances like that, maybe one crime a year that would take place, something similar along those lines. At one time, there was a nude woman, Latin woman, who had been found dead behind my old Boy Scout hut. She was dumped into this field behind, there was a Boy Scout hut and a soccer field and then a forest, and she was dead. They believe she might have been a prostitute in the trailer parks because there's sex trafficking with some of the women. Maybe some of them work in the chicken plants. Maybe they please the men who work in the chicken plants. Then they come to these trailers. They have sex with them for money. And she'd been dumped back there, and they think maybe her pimp did it and then he ran off. But that's the thing. When you don't have records of people, it can be difficult to track these things. That is a kernel of truth to what he's saying. But then to distort it into every illegal immigrant here is a rapist, a murderer. They're all committing crimes. It's very dangerous. We got to deport 11 million people to keep our country safe. He takes something that there's a grain of truth to, and then he distorts it into something completely apocalyptic and negative. And this thing with the Haitians is even scarier because apparently there have been some Haitians that have moved into Marshall County. I don't think it's that many. Knowing Marshall County people, they saw 8 black new faces and they freaked out because some parts of that place used to be sundown towns. The sun went down and you were black, you shouldn't be there. I think they just freaked out that there's been some new black people that they don't know who they are. And then to see him do this thing with Springfield, Ohio, and some of the Haitian immigrants, I know that's going to bleed into people's lives in Alabama, and that's terrible. Now, every fucking time some old woman, some old Karen has a dog gone missing, my dog's missing, and I bet it's that Haitian guy down the street. His name's John Vac Tabassier, or whatever. His name's Toussaint, and he practices voodoo, and I bet he needed that dog for some voodoo ritual that he was doing down there. They say shit like that. Oh, they take the chickens from the chicken houses and perform voodoo rituals with them. These are awful things. You say things about Trump being a bigot and a racist, and of course that's true, but then to have that bleed out into the world and into the country, it affects people. Haitian kids going to school, they're going to be taunted with, my hamster's missing. I bet Jean ate it. And that's terrible. By the way, climate crisis is going to make a lot of Caribbeans probably have to come to America over the next few decades because parts of their islands are sinking. And we want them to be welcome. But Trump specifically going after the Haitian immigrants, that ties into the larger thing he said about African and Caribbean nations being shithole countries. And we should be stopping people from coming here. Kamala laughed about his stupid comments, and they were laughable. But her dad is from Jamaica. Obama's dad, of course, was from Kenya. So when Trump was trying to block certain African nations from immigrating here, what he's really trying to do is prevent them from coming here and assimilating and making kids. And Obama's dad never immigrates here to America. He never has to deal with Barack Obama. Like Barack Obama's not a thing. So, oh, good. There's never been a black president. Kamala Harris's dad doesn't immigrate here from Jamaica. He's not about to lose to Kamala Harris. He's not sweating buckets thinking, oh shit, I'm about to lose to a woman whose parent is from Jamaica. Tying in that their parents were foreign born and came to America and trying to prevent that from ever happening again. That's all connected. Racist rhetoric about Haitian immigrants, shithole countries comments, the Muslim ban. Mostly, if you look at the countries he actually banned with the Muslim ban, half of them were African nations. And that's felt specifically like, I'm going to stop African people from coming here. And his followers that are completely voting for him for these reasons are the new know-nothings, where that nativist sentiment has become more important to them than a competent, capable, non-corrupt government that they can count on in crises like COVID. I think they'd rather die from COVID than let even 1 million more African or Caribbean people come into the country. That's how scared they are of this shit. All they're voting for, and that is the encroaching idiocracy, to ignore how dangerous and crazy and stupid. Tariffs, yeah, sounds good. They don't even care if that destroys the whole economy because they were able to deport some people they don't like from being here. Okay, everybody, thanks for listening. I'll be back in October with our, last episode before the big election. Although early voting has started, please vote. Voting has started in your state. Please go ahead and vote and contribute extra amount you can to the Kamala Harris Super PAC or some of the Senate candidates I mentioned earlier.